Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday, September 6, 2017 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission. Commission public meetings are typically held the first and third Tuesdays of each month, except on weeks like this. Both meetings provide opportunities for the public to address the commission, and we certainly encourage all persons to participate in public meetings. Citizens requiring translation or sign language or other reasonable accommodations may contact the clerk's office at least 2 days in advance, typically via phone is best, 794-6140, or email to make those requests. Planning Commission meeting agendas and packets are available from the Legislative Information Center on the City Clerk's webpage or on the first floor of City Hall on the Friday prior to the meeting. We have a call to order. We'll start with a roll call for tonight's meeting.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Klein.
Here.
Commissioner Gabrandel.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Here.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
The end of summer and school starting gives us a full commission.
Excellent. Great. Thank you all for being here. Next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. I have a commissioner move the agenda, Commissioner Mills, and a second for that, Commissioner Milstein. Any discussion or changes to the agenda? Just one, Mr. Leonard.
No change. I just want to point out we will be conducting a regular business, then anticipate adjournment, and then reopening as a working session for a pre-PUD application later in the evening.
So we'll have a short break after the regular agenda. All right. All in favor of the agenda as printed, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? All right, the agenda is approved. Our next item, introductions. We have none this evening, so we will move on to the next item, number 5, minutes of the previous meeting. We have the minutes from August 15th, 2017. Commissioner Woods, are you moving those minutes? Yes. Oh, excellent. Is there a second on those minutes? Commissioner Trudeau, any discussion, corrections on the minutes? Seeing none. All in favor of the minutes as in the packet, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's everybody. Takes us to item 6, our reports from council, administration, planning manager, and commissioners. And we get Commissioner Ackerman is here tonight. Can you start with a report from council?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It has been some time since the last update. Starting with all things green, a number of properties have been added to the city's green belt in surrounding townships outside of our annexation zone. The Treeline Urban Trail, or the Allen Creek Greenway, as some people know it, the master plan is now being publicly released and distributed for feedback and comment. Then the final item of things that are green, medical marijuana, is moving forward. We as a body will begin discussion of some proposed ordinance language on September 12th. Then finally, on terms of site plans, LA Fitness, commercial property on the west side of town, moved forward unanimously. And finally, myself and some other commissioners are part of a joint committee with the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, which over the past months has been discussing opportunities to rezone areas along major transit corridors to improve affordability in the city by increasing housing supply, and also achieve some of our sustainability goals by getting people to live closer to where they work. That is all for me. I'll pass it to Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Yeah, you just got back to your seat. Do you have any updates for us from the planning manager?
No, other than in my buzzing around the room, if Councilmember Ackerman didn't update you, I anticipate bringing the next discussion of medical marijuana to the working session on September 12th.
Okay. Thank you. Next is updates from planning commissioner officers or committees. Are there anything to report, Commissioner Weatherby?
For the ZBA, the 1140 Broadway Street, Broadway Village parking variance was approved. by the ZBA. This was a request to reduce the required parking to 9/10 of a space per unit, which was, so there was a total of 558 spaces instead of the 620 that would be required. The ZBA determined the variance met the spirit, harmony, and intent of the requirement. If that development had wanted to do all 2 bedrooms, they would have had to do even fewer parking spots. So this seemed like a reasonable variance, and that was approved.
All right, thank you for that update. Good to know. Other commissions? Yeah, Commissioner Mills.
In keeping with what Commissioner Ackerman said about the tree line, the Allen Creek Urban Trail, there's a Citizen Advisory Committee meeting next Wednesday. Those have always been open to the public, but this one in particular, we have been encouraged to invite our friends and family and neighbors. It will be in this room, council chambers, on Wednesday, September 13th at 8:30 a.m., and it runs until 10:30. They're going to start out with a half-an-hour Q&A session, and then there'll be an open house to answer questions, see the maps, and that kind of thing. If you are interested, the draft of the master plan, which we will see as a body, but that is being circulated right now, is available online. And as was written in MLive, and I noted myself, there is a substantial change to the southern section, which no longer goes through U of M property. So just wanted to draw your attention to that if you're so interested. But do show up next Wednesday, 8:30 a.m.
All right, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Okay. In terms of written communications and petitions, I'll draw your attention to a couple of things that were in your packet. Email communication, and I believe the second item is, Mr. Leonard, you said this was action from council on the core spaces?
No, this is the correspondence is a recommendation from the Historic District Commission, some thoughts about potential review of the library lot proposal. No action requested.
Okay. I'd urge you all to read that after the meeting then. Takes us to our next item, which is the audience participation. This is an opportunity for members of the audience to address the commission on any item that is not listed as a public hearing in this agenda. So if it's listed in number 10 or number 11, this is not the time to speak of those, but you can speak to the commission on any other item. And if you would like to do so, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you may speak for up to 3 minutes. Okay. Seeing no one, I'm going to close that audience participation portion. There is another time at the end of the meeting if you think of something to say then. We'll now look at public hearings scheduled for the next business meeting.
Yes, we have 2 public hearings proposed for the September 19th City Planning Commission meeting. One is 2857 Packard Road. This is a site plan that is being considered by the Planning Commission prior to City Council approval. This was previously submitted as an area plan and was conditionally rezoned to R1E. The site plan is proposing 51 units to be built on this approximately 8-acre parcel. And then next is the Glen Mixed Use Development Plan Unit Development Site Plan for City Council approval. This is a proposal to build a 9-story mixed-use building with hotel retail apartments on a half-acre lot located at 201 Glen Avenue. It includes 252 parking spaces, 34 bicycle parking spaces, 162 hotel rooms, 24 apartments, and just over 5,100 square feet of ground retail space.
All right, thank you. Sounds like we will have an exciting meeting next time. We have no unfinished business on today's agenda, so that takes us to our regular business, item 10. We have 2 items listed. Item 10A is the DTE State Street Utility Substation Plan Project Site Plan for City Council approval. We'll start with a staff report and then public hearing followed by commission discussion and action. So, Mr. Khan?
Thank you. I'd like to summarize the staff report and then show some slides that help illustrate what the project looks like. The site is located on the east side of South State Street, north of Eisenhower Parkway in the Mallets Creek watershed. The site is currently used as a DTE substation. DTE would like to increase capacity of the station to address increasing power needs in Ann Arbor as a result of new development. DTE proposes to install two 120 40 kilovolt transformers and two control centers on raised concrete mats. New precast concrete retaining and screen walls will be installed to provide security to the transformers and help screen the facility. The source of power will be from overhead transmission cables. Access will remain on the south side of the site via an existing private drive that connects to South State Street. A sidewalk exists along the South State Street frontage. 4 landmark trees are proposed to be removed, including 3 red cedars and 1 hawthorn. A total of 21.5 inches of replacement is required. 38 inches of replacement trees is proposed, which will include 34 trees. The replacement trees will be planted on the west and south sides of the site. A planned project site plan modification is proposed to address the height of the proposed transformer towers. The maximum height in the M1 zoning district is 35 feet. The petitioner is proposing 2 transformer towers, which will be 55 feet in height, with lightning rods that extend an additional 15 feet. The total height of the 2 towers with the lightning rods is proposed to be 70 feet. 2 site characteristics will help mitigate the visual impacts of the towers. 1, the site slopes down from South State Street, which helps reduce the perceived height from South State Street. And 2, existing landscaping on the site along South State Street will help block some of the view of the 70-foot tall towers. Proposed landscaping along the west side and south sides of the site will also help mitigate visual impacts over time. The site currently includes 2 primary structures that are 30 feet tall and a communication tower that is 38 feet tall. A below-grade stormwater system is proposed. Stormwater will flow through a deep bed of gravel that surrounds the concrete pads on the site to a below-grade system of pipes that will outlet at the northeast corner of the site. Staff recommends approval of the planned project site plan because it complies with all the applicable local, state, and federal ordinances, standards, and regulations. It will not cause a public or private nuisance and will not have a detrimental effect on public health, safety, or welfare. Staff further recommends approval of the planned project modifications because the project is consistent with the standards of approval for planned projects in Chapter 55. I do want to point out that a number of DTE representatives are here to help answer any questions that you may have about the facility. I would like to show some slides, if I may.
Please.
This is a slide that shows the aerial photo of the region at large along South State Street. This is an aerial photograph showing the L-shaped site just on the east side of South State Street and north of the access drive. This is a zoning map showing that the site is zoned M1. And this is existing conditions. I do want to point out a couple things here. One is you'll notice that it slopes down from South State Street. So at the left side of the screen, you'll see a cluster of trees. And then the land continues to slope downward. And then it reaches sort of a more level portion of the site before sloping down even more as it makes its way to the east. So the petitioner is proposing to cut into the hillside on the western side of the site and fill a portion of the eastern side of the site to level the site. This is a landscaping sheet as well as the site layout sheet. It shows additional vegetation being planted along the south and western sides of the site. It also shows where the proposed transformers are to be located. These are cross sections. You'll see the top is the section looking east from South State Street. And you'll see the one beneath it is looking west. So if you're at the Argus building, the Ann Arbor Public School site building, and you're looking to the west, you'll see a large retaining wall as well as the security wall. And then looking north is the next cross section. That is the view from the private drive. You can see that there's a gated entrance there. There won't be any parking on the site. There won't be any people who are working there permanently. That's the image of that site. And then looking south would be from the north side of the property. That's a sample of what the wall should look like. The wall is intended to primarily provide safety, to keep people out of the transformer station, as well as mitigate some of the visual impact. This is what it looks like, sort of looking in the northeasterly direction from the other side of South State Street. You can see there's existing vegetation there that is proposed to remain, so that will help block some of the views. This is a little closer. You can see the existing transformer sort of in the central portion of the site on the right-hand side of the screen. And that's looking north from the private drive, and you can see what the transformer looks like. And this is looking to the west from the Ann Arbor Public Schools site. And you can see there's a slope up. So they're going to fill this section of the site, the eastern section of the site. So there will be a wall here that will be higher than that grade, quite a bit higher than that grade. And then this image shows what the proposed landscaping would do. It would complement the existing landscaping that already exists on the west side of the site. And I believe that's my last slide.
All right, thank you, Mr. Khan. So at this point, I'll open the public hearing on this item, and if you'd like to address the commission, please step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. You may have up to 3 minutes to speak unless you are either the petitioner, which the leader of the petitioner group is allowed up to 5 minutes, or if you're a member of a registered community group, if you identify yourself, you may have up to 5 minutes.
Hi, my name's David DePice. I live at 2096 South State Street. Just 3 quick points. One, I'm sure the DTE people are here and can reassure us that when this project is being built that we're not going to have power interruptions or brownouts. So I think the public would like to hear that from them. The second is, when a meeting I attended, this building the substation is only part of a much larger project. Their partners are going to be trenching transmission lines from State Street to Granger, I believe, and Forest, all the way to one of the life science buildings on Washtenaw. So I think it'd be nice if you guys asked them, you know, what the totality of this project is going to be, so you get so the citizens of Ann Arbor have a clear picture of what everything's going to be going on. And in relation to that, it'd be nice if whether the city or DT put up on a website, just as they do for other major street projects, a timeline, the progress, you know, so that people that are impacted by this project will know how it's proceeding. The third point is sort of more of a wish, because we can't always get everything that we plan, everything that we think is going to happen, but you know, State Street was just reconstructed 8 years ago. Some of the other streets that they're going to be going through are probably, you know, 5 years or 10 years or less. It'd be nice if our long-range planning could take into account the fact that we're not digging into our streets less than half of what their expected lifespan would be. And those are my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission on this item? Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll begin by reading the motion. The proposed motion reads, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve DTE State Street Utility Substation Plan Project Site Plan. And commissioners move that. Commissioner Weatherby and Commissioner Milstein seconded. Commission discussion and questions.
Well,
Well, I'll start off with the question that our citizen just had, and I wonder, is there a representative from DTE here who can come forward and speak to some of the issues that were raised, please?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, hello, I'm Paul Gans. I'm Regional Manager for DTE Energy, and my address is 425 South Main. I'm kind of just the warm-up act, but I've got a number of subject matter experts, colleagues with me here that can answer those questions. And if one of you would care to answer that question and just come up and identify yourself and your address and answer Commissioner Wood's question, please.
Everyone else took a step back.
Right, so I guess the first question would be the ones that were asked concerning power outages and brownouts and those sorts of things. Can you tell us how that all works, such that as you're working on this, what the citizens can expect?
Well, the project was
And
conceived.
you may want to
Can you
lean
please speak to
forward
the
into the
microphone if you would?
microphone.
The project was conceived to improve the service quality in the area. So from the commissioning of the new state station going forward, things will be better. But there will be some time where the circuits from the existing state station to the new will possibly cause a few minutes of outages while circuits are cut loose from what they're connected to now and reconnected to new positions. So those will not be long duration events. They'll be short, they'll be managed, there'll be notification.
Can you speak a little bit about that notification, how that goes out and who gets notified?
Can you address that, Paul?
Sure. Well, we have what we call pod messages, predictive outbound dialers, and everybody on that circuit would get a phone call and get a message in that regard. I suppose if we, I kind of like the idea of having things online and having notifications. I do want to point out that this power improvement project is no secret to the city. We've been talking about it for about 2 years. We've met with the mayor a couple of times. We've met with each council member. We've had wonderful cooperation from professional city staff to make suggestions on how all of this should go together. This is one of the most significant investments that DTE Energy has done in my lifetime, and I've got 33 years in with the company. Just our investment alone is going to be between $150 and $200 million.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Gans, because I know you've worked on the Energy Commission here and that you've been a big help like that. So that, I guess, would lead me to the other question that our commentator asked, and that was, can you give us a sense of the totality of the project? Sometimes because of the fact that we work in different sectors of the city, Planning Commission may not be aware of what exactly you've already spoken to the mayor and others about. So if you could help us with that, because this might be the first opportunity for many citizens, and I know for commissioners, to actually hear about that.
Well, in terms of the working on State Street, there will be new cables put in the ground, new conduit put in the ground. But I understand that Ann Arbor has a rule that only so much length of the road can be worked on at any given time. So we're not going to have, like a mile's worth of a lane shut down. It's just going to be the, I don't know what that distance is. That was pointed out at our open house we had at the school administration building, that just short sections of the road will be cut at any given time. And then those will be put back in the condition that we found them in. New concrete. So it'll progress from State Station up to the direction of the load that we're serving.
Okay. And I guess, yes, Mr. Leonard?
So if I could just add in, I can't speak to how interrelated they are, but I could just tell you some of the other projects that I am sort of at least anecdotally familiar with that might respond to it. So in addition to this substation specific, I know we've been contacted by contractors or representatives of ITC or who are looking at overhead line distribution, new cables heading from this site to the south, largely along the railroad tracks. So that is one I think during public comment, there was a reference for a significant conduit that's being proposed through the city. I don't know the specifics of where that's going, but I would anticipate that that's part of that multi-million-dollar investment that Mr. Gans indicated. And then lastly, I think in partnership with the University of Michigan, they're sort of on the horizon of talking about some potential expansions for, I want to say it's called the Apex Power Station up on the north side, which I presume all of these are interrelated towards improving the power delivery and capacity within the city.
Okay, thank you. I guess my last question before other commissioners ask, in terms of the tower, which is going to be pretty high, I was wondering, and I don't know if we had any renderings of what that might look like, or if Mr. Khan could give us a sense of that. Will there be like lights on the top of that tower? No? It'll just be a real skinny looking pole up there?
Yeah, some of the so-called towers are lightning masts, so lightning strikes would hit those and conduct that power energy to ground, as opposed to hitting the equipment, which could lead to that equipment failing. So those lightning rods are protection.
Oh, okay.
They're not active, they're just simply tall conductors.
Oh, okay, good. Mr. Khan, did you want to, you look like you had something else to say about that, or no? Okay. All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods. Other commissioner questions at this point? Commissioner Mills, and then Commissioner Gibrandal after that.
So just a point of clarification, in the, when you were talking about the bigger project, it sounded like there's some talk of an underground conduit, but then also overhead transmission. Is it either or both and?
It's both.
Both, okay. So, and I assumed that just because you can see the lead lines on here go, and the staff report said it was going to the overhead transmission. Is this substation currently connected via overhead transmission?
It's currently connected with 40,000 volt lines from a station called Pioneer, which is south of the airport along the railroad tracks.
Okay.
So that's going to be changed to a higher voltage, which will supply the additional capacity to state and allow us to distribute that capacity more efficiently with the new transformation.
Got it. So there's currently overhead lines, but these will be bigger overhead lines.
Right,
And
right.
presumably bigger structures that.
Yeah,
Taller transmission towers.
Yeah, and there'll be 2 circuits on them, so there won't be additional paths. There'll just be one path with a more robust circuitry on it.
Okay. Thank you. Just so I could understand, again, the scope of that. One of the things that strikes me is that in our renderings, or in the pictures, we've, like the photographs that you went off and took, you've got the vegetated part largely that's against the road, but there's the tallest part of this structure is going to be farther north, which there's no frontage. There's currently a building there, but like, do we have any sense of what the visual impact is going to be from the road? Because it doesn't look to me like there's vegetation there.
You'll certainly see it. It'll be a 50-foot tower, 55-foot tower plus 15-foot light garage. So I think the existing vegetation will help mitigate that to some degree. But as you approach the site from the south and from the north, if you look in that direction, you'll see it. Bear in mind that the wall itself is about 89 feet from the right-of-way. And so the tower portion itself is even further back. So it isn't right on the road, but if you're approaching the site from either direction on State Street, you'll certainly be able to see it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I'm thinking, I mean, again, because we don't have renderings, we've got the profiles, but not in context of what's there now.
Right.
It's hard to visualize, but in my mind, coming from the north, if you're traveling south on State Street, when you don't have that nice block of vegetation that's currently there, like that's in my mind, it seems like that's where it's going to be most visible. Is that a correct assumption, or do you have any sense of, does that seem right?
I'm gonna respond, but then I'm gonna ask the GTE reps to respond. I think it's a correct assumption. I do want to point out that in addition to the existing vegetation, the site is sunken.
Right.
It's not at grade, it starts dropping as soon as you leave State Street. And so there is that to consider, that from State Street, it won't look like a 70-foot tower, it will look probably more like a 50-foot tower, if that helps at all.
Right. And also for clarification, if you can go back to one of the pictures of the existing substation. So what we see right there in the middle, the tower with the lightning rod there, is this the one that's 38 feet currently?
That is a communication pole, I believe. There's a little antenna on the top of that structure. Am I correct, Mark?
Okay, so that's the one
So-
that's in the staff report is
Right.
the tallest structure currently. So we're talking something that's almost twice as high. Okay.
But still a very slender profile, so it's not a, a large
Yeah.
obstruction to vision.
So while we're, in terms of the profile, it's, it looks, that seems like a monopole or just a single, it looks like a telephone pole, right, with the thing on top.
Right.
The structures, I know that the lightning rod itself, or lightning mast, is just a single ground rod, but it's attached to a 55-foot structure that's like a frame.
Two separate structures.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little
Sure.
bit more about how that looks? It's hard, just because of the scale, it's hard from the
Sure.
picture to tell what's lines and what's. Yeah.
I'm Mark Fairless. I'm with DTE. So there are two separate structures. The lightning masts are essentially individual poles that are 70 foot tall, as Andy described, to take the strike of a lightning storm so that the equipment's protected. The dead-end structures that you see in the background, they look like, for lack of a better term, we call them H-frames because they literally look
Yeah.
like H's. Those are the structures upon which the transmission lines will dead end and then drop down into the station to feed the equipment.
Got it. Okay, so when I have, in looking at that looking north section, the one in the kind of the middle of the page, they look like they're on the same,
Well,
same
they
place,
may
but
be
it's
in line-
not.
correct.
They're aligned, but
Correct.
the tallest, the lightning mast is I see now in the looking east, it's farther south.
Correct.
The H frames are on the north
It's to
extent.
the north, correct.
Okay, and that's presumably where your transmission lines are gonna be coming in?
That is correct.
Okay. That's helpful to understand that. So I agree that the lightning mast itself is just twice as high of what's currently there. The H-frames are skinny, but there's more to them than just a single pole.
Correct.
So another question that I have, because this is significantly higher than what's permitted in this district, is what kind of alternatives you considered? For the sake of full disclosure, I'm married to a substation engineer and am a recovering engineer myself, who filled me in on some alternatives. So tell me about what else you considered.
So I'm going to defer that again to Andy and some of the other team members who worked on the overall concept for the substation.
Got it.
Well, frankly, I would have rather had this facility further north than the property we're using, but, with the lack of land available, the size, the shape, dimensions and cost, we're developing our existing station. Fortunately, it was big enough to accommodate what we want to install in it. The structures are as small of a profile as mechanically you can make them. I mean, they have to hold the tension of the wire coming in from the next structure down the line. They're a dead-end structure. They have to be robust to hold that. They have to train the wire down from its incoming terminations down to the equipment. So there's going to be triplets of wires on both of these to train down. So they will have some, dimension to them, as opposed to the lightning masts, which are just single structures. So there is a bit of mechanical activity going on in those structures that make them more of a visual screening.
So the rudimentary, like, dinner table discussion that we had was more, like, you could often get the same capacity with more shorter towers, or was that something that was considered?
Well, frankly, that's what we're trying to get away from.
Okay.
The city is ringed by a lot of small voltage lines, and the way they're all tied together, the service quality in the city suffers from that because there's a very large area of things that can be impacted, and they all influence each other. So with this project, we can bring in power in this fashion and not have to rely on this ring that contributes to more service quality problems than it should be. So we can start cutting the ring open, still have more capacity than we do now, and a problem in one area is not going to influence everything.
Sorry, and maybe I should have been clearer. I think I was talking more same capacity or same overall, whatever the units are.
Line miles?
Yeah,
or-
well, no, sorry, the kilovolts, same kilovolts total.
Yeah.
But additive, but smaller on that same footprint. Is that not many more?
Well, that's what contributes to the problem. It's
Okay,
like,
got it.
it's like having, I don't know. It's like having a freeway that carries a lot of cars very quickly versus a dozen alleys where people are driving very slowly,
Sure.
inefficiently. You stop a couple of those and everything doesn't work.
Got it.
So, I mean, it's from an electrical point of view, less is better in
Got it.
terms of things that can fail. So if you have 20 things out there, likelihood of something failing is a lot greater than one thing.
That makes sense to me. In some urban environments, they use gas insulated substations rather than, this is
yeah.
air insulated, was that considered, or like, is that not something DTE does? Can you talk about the pros and cons?
You'd still have a building there. The gas insulated switchgear would still be housed in a structure that would have the same profile as the transformers. So bringing the power in, with those structures, you'd still see them, but the gas insulated switchgear would still have the same profile as transformers in the control house that's shown on that diagram.
And so going gas insulated wouldn't make it shorter?
Not those structures. It would make the switchgear that we're putting in, which will be totally invisible by the passerby because it's going to be below the level of the walls for the most part. And the gas insulated switchgear would be the same thing, low level, less than 12 feet tall.
Okay. That's all I had for right now. I'll pass it off to somebody else. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anything else?
There may be other questions. Commissioner Gibrandal, you were
Yeah,
next
so
on
I'm
this.
seeing on this section A, looking north, that there's a 27-foot wall from the parking lot of the Ballast Building for the Ann Arbor Public Schools that they will be looking at. That's a really, really, really tall wall. And I don't know that they are required any kind of screening for something there. But boy, it'd be nice if there were a few vines or something, because that's a really tall wall that,
said
many people go
vines?
down vines. I see a
Yeah.
bunch of ornamental grasses, which if you're lucky are gonna get 5 feet tall. So it might be nice just to have a little bit of mitigation, because that's something that people in our community use. They go to that ballast building for school administration issues and things like that, and school board meetings, and it just, that's an unusually tall retaining wall to have next to a parking lot that many people in our community use. And I know that, you know, you may not be required that, but it'd be nice to have a little something there for those of us that use that parking lot, because that just seems, that's unusually tall from what we're seeing with.
I don't see any problem with the vines growing on that. That would be acceptable.
Let me just jump in real quick. So if you look at the landscape plan, we are providing some ornamental grasses and shrubs, low-level screening. One of the issues is we don't necessarily want something that someone could climb up and get into the substation, you know, a vine or a tree or anything of that type. So we're working, I think, with the school board to help, you know, mitigate some of those issues. And right now, that's what we're proposing, is just some lower shrubs and ornamental grasses of that type.
You could climb the vine?
I would suppose it's possible, you know, depending on how thick those vines get.
I think your substation will become something completely different by the time those vines become anything that is climbable in terms of what it would actually take to truly.
Well, that would be one of
climb a
my
vine.
concerns, you know, speaking from someone who's been in the industry and has seen things, you know, that happen from time to time, so.
And I hasten to add, we don't typically put decorative walls around substations because they're air-cooled. We just put cyclone fences on it. We did hold a neighborhood meeting 2 Thursdays ago. My office sent out 150 invitations to people who might have to look at this and be affected by it. We had 1 phone call, 3 people show up. One of them worked in the Bayless building. The school's been marvelous to work with, and they kind of stipulated what they wanted to look at. So I think we've tried to make just about everybody happy in that regard.
Okay, I feel like more people use this than just the people that work there too, I guess is what I would say. But if you all feel like it's going to compromise the safety of your facility, it just feels like a pretty brutal thing to have next to a parking lot that's used by a lot of people, so.
Commissioner Ackerman and then Commissioner Weatherby.
Thanks. To the previous point, I think your wall is going to get decorated whether or not you do it or whether or not people do it.
Right. So to that point, we are planning to put graffiti guard on the wall to mitigate that possibility. And, you know, should that happen, we will clean the wall and reapply the graffiti guard as needed.
Okay. Could be some exciting opportunity to collaborate with the school district on some public art as well.
Possibly, yeah.
Public art is a great deterrent of graffiti. So I'll put that idea out there before trying to get a better grasp of the project in its totality. And this might be a better question for Mr. Gantz. I appreciate the investment that you're talking about. You got a lot of ratepayers in the city, and they appreciate the attention. And, you know, we've been very visibly seeing tree trimming and line clearance in neighborhoods, and I think people are grateful for that. But I think March is on top of everyone's mind when DTE comes up and hundreds of thousands of outages. Can you talk a little bit about how this feeds into trying to stabilize local power delivery, to what areas may see improved service, more consistent service, especially as you get to the block by block?
Well, I was trying to think of similes that you could appreciate. And this isn't much different than when you rebuilt the parking decks and you still wanted to have people to be able to park. You wanted to increase the capacity for water and sewer. At the same time, you don't want to shut people off. So we're trying to build more capacity, better power quality, and better redundancy while we're not trying to inconvenience people at all. Between the 2 substations, like I said, our investment alone is going to be north of $150 million. That is significant by our standards. I think that that the way things have grown, it's been sort of an organic basis. You grow to follow a load. We don't build Ann Arbor substations or SIO substations. We build them to follow load. And you're the tripwire, you're the front line for all of the good things that are coming into the town that are being planned for. I recall, what was it, 6, 8 years ago, something like that, we were here to talk about the Buckler substation, which had to fill a 30 megavolt hole that was created by the expansion of the medical center up at the top of the hill. And the community, the city was very cooperative in understanding that we had to build that substation in the center of the load, and that was right off the back of our Broadway, or our, yeah, the Ann Arbor Service Center. What road is that on? It's behind the Kellogg Eye Center. So we had to do some extraordinary things because there's 3 immutable things that you have to do when you're building a substation. It's got to be in the center of the load that you want to take care of. It's got to be available to overhead connections, sub-transmission lines, so that you can actually power it up. And it has to be on land that's available and zoned for those purposes. So those are the very dividing strictures that we have to function under, even in a settled urban environment like Ann Arbor. So we're kind of like working on your heart. At the same time, we're trying to keep everybody going and keep everybody happy. Now, I will tell you that, you know, we're not happy with the power quality that we've been experiencing just on the typical resident, and that's one of the triggers for this as well. There have been far too many outages, far too many of recurring, and that's why we're trimming trees, we're investing in overhead, and we're investing in substations. Substations used to be 9 months, a year and a half. Now they take years to put in for the very reasons we're sitting here and talking, because there's a lot to consider. Did I answer your question, Commissioner?
Sure, it was valuable background. It was valuable background. I guess more specifically, can you speak to what redundancies you're filling, what areas of the city may see improved service, and what that improved service looks like?
Well, yeah, maybe one of my colleagues can help me. I know that one of the issues is we want to decouple the university.
I don't know if we can get into specific, the specific areas of the city, but if you think about it from a standpoint of a spider web, and my name's Dan Breaker, I'm a general platform manager for the project. But if you think about it from a spider web perspective, we have stations that surround all of Ann Arbor, but nothing really from a station perspective. There's a like Buckler substation, but from a station perspective, there's nothing really in Ann Arbor. So you've got these stations that take 120 kV to 40 kV, and then the sub-transmission comes into the city, right? And all this sub-transmission coming into the city is like a spider web. And when you get a fault on one side of the city, it can travel as much as 10 miles and cause outages across the city. So what our goal is to basically be able to pull major load off of that 40 kV infrastructure. And then we're going to pull apart that spider web so that, you know, the east side of the city is not impacting the west side of the city. So if we have a tree go onto a line over here, it's not tied all the way across the city, and it won't cause an outage for multiple people. So we were looking at, we did some analysis that says, you know, depending on where you're at in the city and which tie lines we're pulling apart, it could be anywhere from 12 to 50% reduction in outages. But I don't have the specifics with me as to, you know, sort of where in parts of the city it was 12%.
I wouldn't ask you to describe a spider web verbally. That sounds tough. Thank you. No, that's very helpful. I think actually, I'm sorry. With respect to road closures, as lines are going in, what is your anticipated time of construction? You're reaching kind of the end of the construction season right now, or at least it's visible. And in terms of road closures on State Street, what can residents expect?
I'm Prem Kavre, project manager for this project. We plan to start construction from October of this year. We'll go next year, December 2018. we want to eliminate the winter timing and football season time. So we stagger the construction in such a way that it doesn't impact either the common traffic or during the peak hours. The target is start from this October, starting from 200 feet a day, wherever possible, and continue till next year.
Okay. And the distance that would need to be traveled in total, 200 feet?
So about from state to campus, about 15,000 feet. So we'll have one crew or two crew working at a time, and 200 feet at a time. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have to start a bit earlier in October to avoid the winter. What do you call from March to April or March to May, we may have frost loss. So we want to eliminate those periods. We start a bit early.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you anticipate normal working hours or working two shifts?
Currently,
or-
we are working normal shift. If required, then we'll have a road closure permits applied in advance, and we plan to work one shift at a time. And if required, we will increase to second shift.
Is that typically Monday through Friday you're talking about? or-
Yeah, Monday to Friday, because Saturdays are football season time, so we try to eliminate those. And something falls off, we'll try to compensate on holiday time. But we haven't awarded the contract as of now. We are just in the process of completing documentation, and the bidding is to be started next month.
And so you'll be working with MDOT in terms of the closure?
Yes,
permits
MDOT and the city,
coordinating with
yeah,
any
the
of the
city
work-
also, yes. There's a road closure procedure we are following with the rest applications in well in advance. We follow all the process and protocols.
And what I think I heard you say is you're expecting this to take a little over a year, the overall project?
There are two phases. One is the conduit construction and then cable pulling. So conduit construction will end sometime end of April next year, and they'll pull the cable from May onwards. There are two phases of construction.
Is the 200 feet at a time a requirement from the city?
Pardon me?
Is the 200 feet at a time a requirement from the city? Is that the-
Around that, yes.
Okay. Do you have opportunities to work from both ends at once?
And no,
Speed
200
operator?
time, I'm not sure of that because we need to still investigate. We were told that at any point of time, 200 feet can be opened up. So it may not be from north and south, we can't have 200 here, 200 there. We have to investigate that. At this time, we are focusing only 200 feet at a time.
Okay.
In
I
either
think that would be
direction.
valuable information, but thank
Yes.
you. Yeah.
I think per the ordinance, I think it's 200 feet at a time. So not on both sides, yeah.
So you got just about over a year to change the ordinance? No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's about, yeah, that's what your worry is too. Yeah.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Weatherly first, I think, and then Commissioner Briggs.
So my comments are less of the big picture and the engineering part, and more from the perspective that I've ever seen this site, which is walking by it and busing by it and driving by it. My questions are more about the State Street side and a little bit about the north side. We did just approve a hotel very close to this site, and I'm a little concerned that we're paying no attention to the north side because there's nothing there, but there will be something there, and that maybe we should pay a little bit of attention to the north side also as far as sightlines, and because that's going to be some people's introduction to the city, and looking straight at this, may or may not, we should look like we care about the north side too. So I'm just going to say that. The State Street side, I have a small substation in my neighborhood, and nobody calls it the substation. They call it the place where the cherry trees are, because there are what were probably supposed to be ornamental cherry trees planted there many years ago, but are actually fruiting cherry trees. And so it's really kind of awesome because the neighbors and the birds and the students and everyone walking by swarms to these cherry trees, and when they're fruiting, it's actually quite nice. So one of the things I'm interested in seeing is it looks like all the landscaping is kind of done to mitigate the look of this big wall. But I'm wondering if we could actually bring some of that landscaping up closer to the street and possibly make it something like fruit trees that would be something that would be interesting for the passers-by. I think we're going to have quite a few more people walking that route. We aren't fooling anyone with some trees and a few evergreens in front of that and a 70-foot tower behind it. So I think maybe even bringing some of the landscape up closer, it's hard for me to tell what the landscaping looks like from these, but the one picture where it has the proposed landscape, I realize it's just a rendering. Keep going, the photograph.
Oh, okay.
Or Photoshop. Yep. So, to me, if there could be trees up closer to the street that wouldn't impact, this to me is not, I'd just as soon see that wall than these evergreens. I think it's probably fine to put the evergreens there, but with the big, I would like to see something more, maybe some edible landscaping, something prettier, something right along that front area that will kind of block the structures in the back. There's a bus stop right there. I think we saw some people standing at the bus stop in one of these photos. Yep, you can see there's some people might just be walking by, but I think there's actually a bus stop there also, like just one of the kind of temporary, just a stop. It's not, there's no shelter there or anything. But maybe like a bench or some, is there a way to make your contribution to this a little less suburban evergreen and a little more, hey, this is part of a city and we want to make this a nice avenue to walk by? I think it would be very small input on your part, just maybe some change of landscaping, maybe a commemorative bench or some art, something that's up closer to the sidewalk. So that's, I don't know if there's anyone who can address something like that. I don't know where your property line goes. I see that the Ann Arbor Public Schools have their sign there.
Yeah, we can basically, we'll work with the city staff to figure out, some alternatives that might address your questions.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah, and I do think I do think landscaping up close to the street does a better job in terms of minimizing those sight lines. Because if a tree that's 20 feet next to a 20-foot wall, it doesn't do that good of a job, but if it's up close to the street, it can, I think, have much bigger impact.
Right.
Staff is happy to work with DT about that.
Okay, that would be great, yeah, because this offset is, it is set so far back that even when you walk by now, it's so far back compared to everything else. So I think we could bring some of that forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Briggs.
Very briefly, and I completely support that desire for kind of placemaking along that spot. Just that we received a communication from one of the neighbors, and it just wasn't clear to me with regards to how we discussed screening earlier, how it impacts 2511 South State Street, the Savarino properties. They had mentioned that there's fairly little vegetation left there, and it just wasn't clear to me if some of the screening was going to be improved a lot for them or what the impact was. They were surprised by the project, so.
Mr. Khan, can you tell us, we did get an email communication, but
I
has that
had a
been going back and
conversation
forth?
with Stephanie Savarino this afternoon, who called for the first time and expressed concern about this. She indicated that she didn't know how much of the vegetation in back of her property was going to be impacted. And I pointed out where the location of the property line was, and in fact, the slope, much of the slope, is on her property with a lot of the vegetation, so she felt, I think, a little better about that. We did look at this image together, but she did want to have a conversation with representatives of DTE about what she was going to be looking at, and she had hoped to find ways to minimize the visual impact.
We did receive the communication from the citizen that you're talking about, and we reached out to them with a copy of some of the information that we've provided at the open house, and we offered to meet with them individually if they chose to meet with us and talk about the project.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Appreciate that. Commissioner Briggs, do you have other follow-up?
That's
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be helpful in terms of their understanding of the impact. They may not understand how much of the existing vegetation is coming down. It's not clear from what we have here how much that is either. So I just want to recap and make sure I'm hearing correctly. So we're anticipating the entire project to start this October, be completed by December of 2018, if all goes well, keeping fingers crossed. And is that essentially correct? I'm seeing heads nod yes. Okay. And then throughout that, which part is the substation? Is that, the substation and the running of the lines occur at the same time? Or is one part get done first and then the other part? Concurrent?
I'm Prem Kavalet, project manager for this project. There are two phases in this project. The current existing substation, we are going to build a new one first with the 4 transformers, all the structures. There's a PDC, power delivery center, and a control center. The power delivery center distributes 13.2, which is the current substation is 13.2, 40 to 13.2. So we bring 120 to 13.2 and switch over from current station to the new lines. And then we'll demolish the existing station, put a new 40 kV, 40 kilowatt breaker, and then bring the new underground lines to that breaker.
But your crews or subcontractors will at the same time also be
So-
pulling new lines back to the station so that those.
Underground is separate contract, the substation is one contract.
Okay.
So first we'll build 40 kV and 13.2 will be switched over from the current station to the new one. And then current will be demolished and they put 40 kV new one there and then hook up the underground to the new phases.
The underground transmission to the north will be done at the same time as the station being built.
Okay. And that's the, and just so my understanding is that, so we'll be, residents will be experiencing some lane closures and things basically for the next, from October to the following fall, intermittently along State Street.
Around that is.
Okay, so that's the time period there'll be some inconvenience to those using the State Street. And then, if I understand the description you all were making of what the station does and compared to the spider web, this station would serve the entirety of the downtown area of Ann Arbor, not solely, but it would impact, or is there a more specific region of the city that's served by the station?
It would feed a major substation just north of the big house or the football field.
On Hoover there?
Hoover, yes. It will feed, gotta have my dag, I don't remember all the names. Burton. So yes, it's gonna tie into existing subs such as Hoover and Burton. It's going to be disconnected from the web that causes the issues. So it'll have much more robust feeds that serve them in a radio fashion instead of all interconnected.
And the station itself is a substation as well,
Yeah.
so that's all going to be replaced with new equipment.
Appreciate it. I would like to ask you actually to use the microphone so people at home can hear you as well. Can you answer one other question up at the microphone, which is that when this is being done, you talked early on about during switchover, there would be intermittent outages that people might experience that you guys would notify, which is good. And that would be, is it going to occur throughout the length of the project or more at the end of the project when you're bringing the two projects together for completion? What can people expect is what I'm trying to.
I'm Andy Dutloff, DTE Energy. That will occur earlier on because the establishment of the new 13.8 that serves residential and shopping malls and things of that nature will occur first. So the existing service can be taken away. And then the 40 kV aspect of it will occur later on in the project.
So if I'm a resident of Ann Arbor, I might expect that. certain people might experience a intermittent outage sometime in the spring, or?
We have 8 13.2 positions. We're expecting that there's about a 6-month period of time that we'll be transitioning each of those 8 positions over to the new station. So, and different customers are impacted by each of those positions.
Sure.
So when we do the changeover, I don't know, Andy, do you know like how much time that need to do that changeover, that somebody might be out on each position? Is it a couple hours, 4 hours,
The
something like that?
feeders from the new position will go out and meet an existing feeder. So it could be like some period of time of a day where the old connection is severed and the new connection is made.
So it'll be
there's
basically,
gonna-
we'll be doing that 8 times, but the different people impacted.
Right.
Right. I just want to, you think people might be out without power for like a day? Is that?
No, I don't, because.
I don't want to get people panicky, but I also don't, want people to be prepared. They're not.
We have the ability to serve people from the other end of a circuit, so they could be transferred over to another circuit. The backbone of the circuit they're typically on would be transferred to the new, and then that temporary connection will be opened up. So we're going to do all we can to minimize the window, but, we have these procedures to allow that to happen in a shorter period of time as possible.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Prim, what's the schedule for those 8 cutovers? What period of time? Can you talk to them?
Prem Kavalet, project manager. We plan to start the switchover from July of next year, 2018, to end of September, the 8 circuits. And then we will demolish the existing substation between October and November, and we'll start this the new 40 kV 3 positions from December to February. Because 40 kV is a bigger conduit, and 13 point is slightly smaller, so it's less time, but 40 will take longer time. But they won't be impact to the residents for 40 kV, only 13.2 will be affected, and it'll be a short period of time.
Okay, well, thank you. So
Sure.
starting next summer is what people might expect.
July, August, September, 3
Yeah.
months.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woods?
I want to go back to a point that was made earlier where it was suggested that perhaps there might be a website or something which could inform the city and citizens about the progress that you have been talking about. I think that'll be really important so that people can get a sense of that. And also, on my phone, I have a DTE app. So I think it would be helpful if you all could, right now my app is just letting me know if I have a gas leak or a down power line or something like that. But if the apps that you have out there could actually be able to inform, particularly, we have many residents that are students and others, and, this is like something they just use all the time. I think that would be really helpful and would probably make less confusion out there about what's actually going on.
Commissioner, I'd be happy to follow through on that. We've done a couple of things. In the past, when we've done community meetings, we always ask people for their email address so that we know when concerned residents come through, we can do a simple email blast. We've also, in all the tree trimming components around the city, I gave all of our maps of the districts and what we were planning on doing to the city, and I believe they're on the city webpage. So I'll be happy to work with the city communications department to pull something together that's kind of an info piece where people can just click and see whatever, FAQs, something of that nature. It's a fine idea. And I know it's hard to see, but this is an ancient map, and they're going to shoot me for it. But all the red that you see, this is Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County. All the red there, those are substations. Stations and substations. That's the spider web that Mr. Breaker was talking about. So we've got to kind of untie that Gordian knot and retie it for the new century.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion or questions? So I think we're about ready for a vote. I will say, just for DTE folks, in case you're not aware, Mr. Ackerman also sits on city council. So his suggestions for public art and things carry extra weight. You might want to give that consideration as this project may move forward to council. All in favor of the motion as read, please raise your right hand. Say yes. Yes.
Yes.
All opposed? So that passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks for your time today. So we'll go to our next item under new business, which is the Kingsley Condominiums Revised Natural Features Plan for City Planning Commission approval. And I think Ms. DeLillo is, Delio, sorry, is going to give us a staff report on that, followed by public hearing, and take it away.
Yes, I have a staff report, which I'll just sort of highlight, and then I have it's not.
Just get closer to it.
Okay. I have a staff report that I'll just go through some highlights, and then I have a few slides to show. This is the Kingsley Condominiums Revised Natural Features Protection Plan. It's a site plan for Planning Commission approval. The Kingsley Condominiums, site is located on the between Kingsley and Felch. It's just east of the Ann Arbor Railroad and just northwest of downtown. The petitioners are proposing to revise the approved natural feature protection plan of the Kingsley Condominiums Plan Project Site Plan to change the amount of cut and fill in the 100-year floodplain of that site. The Kingsley Condominium Site Plan was approved in August of last year for a single building containing up to 51 dwelling units. That was to replace a collection of 1- and 2-story office and manufacturing and storage buildings. The proposed plan tonight calls, or let me explain it this way. The Kingsley Condominium, this is the site outlined in red, and these are the existing buildings. All of those buildings have since been demolished. The black line on this illustrates where the Allen Creek drain runs through underneath those buildings. The buildings have been removed. The creek remains in its culvert. This is a graphic that shows the Allen Creek drain. The floodway is to the north. Not logically, the floodway is not on top of the drain. It is to the north. The flood fringe extends over top of the drain, and to the west, this orientation is sideways. North is to the left. Proposed building is here, if you can follow my pointer. The drain runs across about over here. Existing floodplain edge is in the solid orange line. The original plan was to construct the building just at existing grade, and therefore its lowest level would technically be in the floodplain, but that lowest level is a parking garage. The request, and so that scheme with building that building at grade and demolishing all of those buildings that were in the floodplain and representing obstructions in the floodplain, that provided a sizable amount of floodplain cut, or an increase in the floodplain capacity. Petitioners are asking to revise that slightly. They'd like to fill underneath the building, and so the new floodplain line would be coincide with the building edge, would be sort of the dashed line. And because of that fill, the amount of increase in floodplain capacity is reduced over what was originally proposed. However, it is still an increase over the actual conditions pre-development. I'll have some numbers in a second. Now, when I say fill underneath that building, we're talking inches to feet. We are not talking about 10 feet or so. Because of the slope of the site, you know, some spots might get a centimeter of fill, and some spot might get
1 to 2 feet of fill, but the average is on the inches level, not feet, to raise this building out of the floodplain. The original approved plan offered about a 613 cubic yard increase in flood storage capacity. Now with this additional fill underneath the building to raise it up, the increase in the floodplain storage capacity will be on the order of 56 cubic yards. So again, it's not as much as if the building was not had fill underneath. However, it's still an increase over what was existing when the buildings were on top of the drain. Floodplains are one of the 7 natural features regulated by the city's land development codes, primarily by Chapter 57. The floodplain's boundaries must be shown on a plan, and any amount of cut and fill is part of the natural feature protection plan. So when there's a change, it comes back to the Planning Commission for approval. The floodplain coordinator has indicated that these changes may be approved by the Planning Commission. It still is within the guidelines of the natural features protection. And staff is recommending approval because although the change results in a reduction of the storage capacity compared to the original, it's still an increase over the previous conditions. This is the proposed landscape plan. I have a few pictures from the original approval showing what the buildings were to look like. I will also mention that the overall height of the building is basically unchanging. With that additional fill for the parking garage, they're just going to decrease the height of the parking garage, the headroom there. The overall height of the building is basically not changing. And I understand that there's been a request to check out the site plan that includes all the calculations with the cut and fill, and here it is. Let me know if there's a specific sheet you'd like to take a look at. Otherwise, staff is recommending approval.
Thank you for that staff report. We'll now have a public hearing on this item, followed by commission discussion. If you'd like to address the commission, please step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Again, you are allowed 3 minutes to speak unless you are the recognized head of a community group or representing the petitioner. Then you may have up to 5 minutes if you identify yourself as such. Anyone care to address the commission?
Hi, my name is Javon Makmali. I live at 115 Felch Street, right up the street. I'm not positive on these facts, but I think maybe 10 years ago the floodplain was redrawn to include my house, whereas before it didn't. And I pay way more than I care to for flood insurance currently. I think a lot of people in my neighborhood may also. So my question generally is, would these changes, these improvements to flood capacity, either before the amendment or after, have any potential to change that line and reduce the number of houses that are within the floodplain? Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll, there's not a quick answer to that, but we'll try to get to that in our proceedings tonight.
Good evening, I'm Fred Beal. I live at 2008 Morton in Ann Arbor. I represent the original landowner and petitioner for the original site plan. And we have represented here tonight our architect and engineering firm available to answer questions. I just remind you a little bit about the project background from when this was first approved in 2016. You know, there's a certain amount of unique nature to this site, having been a long time industrial, bottom of the gorge kind of site along the railroad, and the benefits that were considered when this was approved the first time related to dealing with a large amount of contamination that exists on the site that has actually existed since the drain was built. It was the original fill placed at the drain was contaminated material. Blighted conditions of the building, the floodplain in the Allen Creek drain improvements, and stormwater improvements. Basically, this site was 100% pervious, well within the floodplain, sat on top, literally on top of the Allen Creek drain. all of those things are being improved. And further analysis conducted in preparation for construction start and the work that we've performed so far in initiating the project only highlight those same issues. We're actually facing a larger scope of brownfield conditions that we will be addressing as the project goes forward. We're here this evening to request a revision of the project's natural features plan to accommodate recommendations that were actually given to us initially by the MDEQ to elevate the entire building pad out of the floodplain. This change mitigates community concerns about building in the floodplain, which was certainly one of the objections that came up in the initial approval of the project, and eliminates the need for future condominium owners and the condo association at this site to purchase flood insurance. So it's a significant improvement to the future owners. It's an additional improvement from the standpoint of getting the building out of the floodplain and reducing risk across the board. Again, we have our project team, including architect Brad Moore, civil engineer Kathy Kyneth of Perimeter Engineering, available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beal. Anyone else want to address the commission on this item? Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll read the motion. The motion reads, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves the Kingsley Condominiums revised natural features protection plan to amend the impacts to the 100-year floodplain. Can I have Commissioner move that? Anyone? Commissioner Trudeau, and seconded by Commissioner Mills. So commission discussion. I have a quick question, Mr. Lillo. Why, I understand from the petitioner the advantage to the probably the project and to the future owners. What benefits to the community does this change offer?
I would have to follow up with the floodplain coordinator about what might be more specifics about benefits to the floodplain. It certainly will benefit the future residents of this site with their lower flood insurance. I can address the first speaker's the change in the flood map. This is a pretty localized change, and so the elevation of this building will not change any floodplain mapping on any surrounding sites. What may change his and other people on Felt Street is the project to punch the hole in the dam, or I'm sorry, punch the hole under the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that could have widespread benefits of greatly reducing the floodplain and then reducing or eliminating the need for many homeowners to have the flood insurance requirements. But I would have to follow up with the floodplain coordinator about what might be the more global benefits to this beyond the benefits of this particular residence.
So at this point, this is not made as a case that this is helping the community. I mean, it would seem that on the face of it that from the community standpoint, that if you're a resident nearby, that it would be much better to have the 613 cubic yards of storage than it would be to have the 56 cubic yards. But I'm not sure if I'm missing something in.
The math seems beneficial, but the floodplain map would not change. So those homeowners would not, it would just be apples and oranges. Those homeowners will not come out of the FEMA maps, whether this is done or not. They would have to elevate their own buildings.
Understood.
Yeah.
But for instance, if there was a flood of a given size, like we saw this last week in that area, that water has to go somewhere, and if there's less place for it to go here, then it's going to go somewhere else, right?
That is true. That is, I neglected to mention that staff, we received an email with a video attachment showing some flooding conditions at the low point where Kingsley and First Street have a meet at a right angle, right in that vicinity of the fish park. Talked to the soil erosion inspector, and I traded some voicemails with the floodplain coordinator. Now that area has historically flooded, and it probably will continue to do so in significant rain events. The bulk of that flooding, that flooding was probably exacerbated by all the construction that's going on, which has put silt sacks on all of the catch basins, which really does slow the water down.
Sure.
While they can. Now, when those silt sacks are pulled off, the rate will greatly increase. But the flooding that occurred was actually not nearly as bad as past events. And all of those developments are providing their own stormwater management, which has been completely absent in that corner of town forever. And so overall, the conditions are improved over what they were, and they are continued to improve. But that area is a low spot of town.
Okay, thank you. I'll let other commissioners get a chance to ask questions. And Commissioner Ackerman, was that or were you?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions. The fill itself, are we just talking about cement foundation?
This would be Brad Moore, J. Bradley Moore and Associates Architects. This would be an engineered fill that would go underneath the concrete slab that's on the parking level. So it would be a compactable sand that would be brought in and compacted in lifts. We have to take out a significant quantity of contaminated soil that's under there. So this would just bring in another 8 inches of fill to be compacted.
Okay. And then also, the original plan had a retention system, an underground storage tank.
Oh, yes.
Is there opportunity to expand that system to make up some of the lost opportunity here?
I'll have to let the civil engineer address that issue. My recollection is we're pretty confined where that underground storage system is, but I'll let Kathy speak to that.
I'm Kathy Kyneth with Perimeter Engineering. The site is packed right now. I really don't see an opportunity to expand the underground detention system part of it right now. We're very close to the building wall on the west side and also to the property line. What I can say is that because the site was contaminated, we're being forced to line all of the detention areas, including all of the rain gardens and the underground detention area, so we couldn't provide any infiltration. So we're already providing the extra 20% that's required if you can't provide infiltration. So we're actually storing 120% of what would be required on a normal site.
Yeah, and I remember being grateful for that. So I guess I don't know the hydrodynamics of the fill, but it sounds like you're not able to use you're not able to use much of the surface of the lot itself to do mitigation. It has to be built-in structures like rain gardens and an underground detention tank.
Yeah, right now the site has the underground detention, it has rain gardens, and then we're also using pervious pavers on the end of the site, the south end of the site, where we could do that. But those are basically the best management practices.
So right now, the flow of water as is, if it's to get onto your first floor in the parking, it's going to go into a drainage system and go underground, or where does the water in the affected area go?
What do you mean by the affected area?
I want to make sure I'm answering being the portion of the parking that's being raised.
Okay.
Where is that water flowing?
If
this proposal is passed and passed by council.
Okay, so that is it's the first floor of the building and it's parking. So the parking's all covered, the rest of the building's on top of it. So I really don't anticipate there being a lot of water that would ever flow out of the garage. Now, if you're talking about a flood event, if it were to all flow, you know, the way we have the building designed on the plan you have in front of you, based on a 100-year storm event, that lower level wouldn't see water anymore. The water wouldn't come in there. So the water would. Displacement. Pardon me?
Hence the displacement of, hence losing 90% of capacity to store water. Is there any opportunity with the fill to create more pervious area are we locked in at that 90% reduction? I mean, how do we make up some of that ground? Because I think that, you know, as we're looking at a really problematic area of town and we're looking at redevelopment as an opportunity to solve a lot of the issues that this area has and the community has in terms of stormwater, this was a really exciting project. I think I wasn't privy to this conversation at this table because I wasn't part of this body yet, but at the council table, that was something that was exciting to a lot of representatives. And seeing this loss is, you know, unfortunate. And so I guess I'm being not an engineer trying to find ways to engineer our way out of losing all that 90%.
Okay, I think it's still a really exciting project and doing a lot of good things because we are taking all the buildings off the drain. We obviously are taking a site that is completely paved right now and adding the detention. It currently has absolutely no detention. And also we are adding green space to, like I said, the site that's already completely paved. So the other thing is, you know, we're only talking about raising just where the building is. And I have raised it the bare minimum amount that I have to raise it to keep that floodplain line just at the outside edge going
Right.
around the building. So we've put the minimum back in that we could. So originally, if we were starting from scratch, we could have proposed this. The requirement for the city is that you just don't take up any more capacity of the floodplain, and we're still adding capacity to that floodplain with this plan. So it's still definitely an improvement to the area, and I think it's a better for the people who are going to be having homes there or buying units there, that they don't have to worry about the garage flooding or their cars ever flooding or there ever being water in the basement.
Yeah.
Or not the basement, but the lower level where the
No,
parking
and
is.
I appreciate it, and it is a, you know, market improvement, and that comes across in the staff report. I just, when you're dealing with, you know, cubic dimensions, even taking those inches away turns into something like 260 cubic yards. It's just trying to find the opportunities to reduce the impact of this change would be of interest to me, but I'm not in a place to offer any tangible suggestions at this point.
Sitting here thinking about some of your suggestions, we did remove a significant quantity of what had previously been basement space below the area of the rotunda there. And that will be a granular fill that we put back in compacted. So as you were stating that you thought it might be taken into consideration the capacity of that granular material to actually hold some water. There is that opportunity where that basement used to be. Because the groundwater will elevate. Right now the groundwater is about 7 feet below grade.
Got it.
So that groundwater will, as it sinks in, raise that water table.
Got it, thank you. And that's something already incorporated into the numbers we're looking at now?
I don't think we've quantified it in terms of gallons or cubic feet.
I think that may be beneficial,
Take a stab at it,
if
guess.
possible.
No, I'm not going to guess.
I believe also on a, correct me if I'm wrong, or correct me if I assume wrong, on a different site, you may have been able to lower the parking lot to
Right.
design it to flood more,
Right.
but the parking lot is on top of the drain, and so the ability to lower the parking lot is gone. So,
That's completely correct. And if you look at the new floodplain line that's drawn on there, I've designed it so that that whole parking area can still flood if water were to back up in there. But we really can't lower the grades like along the east side of the site because, in fact, as we're doing demolition of the site, we're finding that the buildings are sitting almost right directly on top of the drain.
So while you're up here, if I can ask just a follow-up question. So it was mentioned that this was in discussions with the MDEQ.
Yes.
Was I don't know if it was a suggestion that they made or a recommendation in terms of this approach earlier that the team did not initially take, but is now decided, So I guess the question I would have is, why is that changing now? Why didn't this, why wasn't this incorporated in part of the original plan?
Mhm. Well, originally, we were trying to keep the building as low as we could, get as much cut as we possibly could. That's what the original goal was. But as we've gone through the permitting process with the DEQ, and also with FEMA, we're working with FEMA, and the city, and the county, and everyone starts getting their review in, it was actually brought to our attention by the DEQ that they will actually allow you to put a certain amount of fill into the floodplain before you have to mitigate for it. But we have told them, well, the city won't let us do that. Any fill that goes into the floodplain would have to be mitigated because their suggestion was they would like to see the building out of the floodplain if at all possible. So that's how we ended up coming back to the redesign of the grading plan, was to try to achieve that. And we already have the floodplain permit from the DEQ, and it's worded in that way. If we can't put the spill in there and change the floodplain line, then it would just stay the way it was, and we would have to accept that that lower level parking area could potentially flood.
Mm-hmm. And will this necessitate, if we approve this, is there a no-rise analysis that has to be done for FEMA?
We are actually already in the process of doing a conditional letter of map revision.
Okay.
We have tried to get a definitive answer from FEMA if they would accept the new revision of the floodplain line, but of course, until we made the formal application, they weren't willing to even comment on it. But that process has been started. And we've coordinated it with the DEQ. The DEQ is good with it. They accept this line. They agree with all the elevations we used. Now we just need to get through FEMA with the next step.
So if FEMA were to not accept it, then you would have to come back to the city and
No,
revert to your previous
we would
plan?
still keep this, but the floodplain line may look similar to the way it does now. We've had conversations with them. There's other things going on regarding this. Because the site is so long and it spans a whole city block, there are various different elevations across the site. So we're trying to get just FEMA to say that, yeah, they agree with the elevations that we've been using, which we've used based on input from the DEQ. So it's just a lot of coordination to get all the agencies to come to agreement and all get on the same page with,
Sure.
with where the line actually is.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Other commission questions? Commissioner Gibrandal?
So a couple of things. The line that shows where the, potential area for flooding looks a lot more complicated on this drawing than what we were shown earlier in terms of the orange line and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
Could you just describe to us, during a storm, what's the flow going to be? Where it looks like it's going to enter off of Felch, not so much off of Kingsley, because you've got a big rise over there.
Correct.
So if you could just kind of tell the story of, okay, here's the big rain event. What happens? What fills up first? Where does it spread to? Like what's happening on the site? Because it's not as straightforward. Just kind of fills up the whole area.
No, it's not straightforward. Yeah. So originally, as you know, there were buildings all along here. So we're taking all those buildings down, but we're still going to maintain a retaining wall with the neighbors because we didn't want to disturb as little area over here as we could.
Their backyards are lower.
Yeah. So this is actually the floodplain line as it exists right now. And it is different than the orange line that you saw in those drawings. I believe that came off the city's map, perhaps. And this is actually based on the modeling of the Allen Drain and the DEQ's analysis that we've gone through. So this is the actual line. The floodway line is way over here.
Right.
And it kind of follows along there. So when there is a flood event, I mean, as you all know right now, I think Alexis was just talking about, this is the area that floods right here. This can flood, and it comes up this way, and then it follows the floodway. So that's the floodway. That's the first area to flood. It can come around Felch, and then it can actually back up into here and flood out this parking area, where before the buildings were all across here, and that water couldn't have had relief to come back up this way.
So the
that's how it
parking
works.
lot is low, and that's taking the
Yes,
water.
yes.
But the curb steps up towards the retaining wall, and that's kind of above it, it almost looked like in your,
Mhm.
I mean, generally speaking, in the line.
Yeah,
that
there's
you're
like a
going
little
through.
strip right along here, along the top of the wall that is a little bit above. But yeah, it is a more complicated floodplain line now because it kind of goes like this, but this area is designed to all flood now.
So describe the limitations of how deep the Allen Creek drain is. I'm just wondering, it just seemed to me that you could have lowered the parking lot 6 inches and gotten quite a bit of storage out of that.
Oh, I can't because the drain's right underneath it, right here. The drain comes right along here.
But how wide is it? I mean, is it 50 feet wide? Is it 10 feet wide? What is?
The drain itself is like 9 feet wide.
Uh-huh.
The easement that it's in is 60 feet, 50 feet.
Right, but you're grading in the
Yeah.
easement.
Yeah. So, but, you know, and so I have to have room to slope across there too. So I have, these are the low areas. I
Right.
have to keep these low and kind of fill this way.
Right.
And trying to keep the fill over the top of the drain so that we have some cover on there, because right now, you know, we got like 4, 6, 8 inches between the surface and the top of that drain. And we need to at least have, you know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet cover over that to
And so,
protect the drain
but there were
itself.
buildings sitting on top of it before? So in other words, this whole site is coming down a whole lot? Because if there were buildings sitting on top of it before, that they would have had footings and things like that? Or were there slabs
There's
sitting right on it?
slabs sitting on top of the
They were using the drain
drain.
as their footing,
Yes,
basically?
ma'am, that's exactly what they're doing.
Okay.
Amazing what you used to get approved.
Okay, so really, there's no chance for even, because it just seems, you know, like inches in a big area.
Oh, I know.
You can get a lot out of that.
I mean, the difference you're seeing in the volumes that we're talking about, that 90% reduction, I only changed this 2 inches, and I changed this about 4 or 6 inches, and that made that whole difference because it is such a big area. So you're, yeah, absolutely.
Right, and it's this tension between what is good for the individual homeowners, but also, you know, what was brought up earlier, which is this larger picture of kind of capacity and where things are sitting, and, you know, that was one of the benefits for me in my mind before,
Mhm.
when we passed this, was that, you know, there's a lot of issues with this site, but
Mhm.
that was a benefit that I saw, you know, that you all were actually opening up things in there, and
Mhm.
so it's a lot less now, so that's, you know, disappointing that, I understand the, you know, for the homeowners and DQ and public safety, all that, but there's this other bigger picture that we have, and I think it's just all very much in our minds. We're watching these hurricanes come through and seeing things that are going way above what everybody is predicting in terms of what our lines on maps are, and so it's like, wow, what are we doing about this? So it's a bigger picture that we can't solve with this particular project, but I guess it's another reminder for us as a body that we have these parameters we need to work within, but it doesn't mean that something isn't going to come in from left field and just make us all look really humble in the face of what nature can dish out. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Mills?
So I'm really struggling because I haven't, and this is not you, as Mr. Veal was talking, I wrote the DEQ original recommendation, and why now? That's what's written on my paper. Because when we heard about this project, when the project came before us the first time, it was common knowledge that the flood, or the garage was built so that it could flood. You talked, I remember the discussion about what kind of features were built into the walls of the garage to allow the floodwaters and not impede them. And so I'm confused because this, to me, it doesn't seem like there's changing conditions on the ground. Like, this was what we approved, that the garage would flood. And so I it seems a bit like a bait and switch, to be really honest. Like, I'm sorry, like, but at the same point, the reason that I'm struggling is because we do have increased rain events. And so if we're trying to build this to get out of the 100-year storm, like, what's gonna happen when that 100-year storm is actually the 10-year storm, which is real? And I, don't wanna see people's cars underwater all the time, but part of the benefit of this, and I think why it was seen as such an important part for this community, was the 613 cubic yards of increased capacity. And to decrease that by 90%, just, I am really struggling. Like, I don't really see a compelling public benefit in this. And so maybe I just didn't understand the why now. Is there, like, what conditions have changed to really necessitate this now that you didn't know about then? Because if the DEQ recommended then that this be out of the floodplain, that's not a change in condition. So what, is there another change in condition?
So I'm going to try to answer what I think you're asking. The DEQ is the one who brought to us the idea of, we think you can put fill on this site, and we'll allow you to put, and I forget what the number is, I think it's 300 cubic yards of fill on this site without having to mitigate for it. And that would be better to get the building up. We know we couldn't put fill in there. We don't want to put fill in there. There's no need to fill the site. We're still providing a cut in the floodplain. So, did the conditions on the ground change? No. But as we started working through the construction documents and the drawings and started reworking the grading plan, we went through a lot of different, sort of value engineering to see where can we put the building. Can we get it out of the floodplain and still provide that cut without having to provide the mitigation? And this is where we ended up at, sort of trying to optimize both things. Still giving you the cut out of the floodplain, still taking all the buildings out of the floodplain, still opening the site all up, and at the same time getting the building out of the floodplain, which, as far as the DEQ was concerned, is a better solution than to letting it flood and have the cars flood on the bottom. So I certainly didn't mean it to come across as a bait and switch. It was just working through the grading plan and kind of perfecting it even more than what we had when we did the site plan. So.
And I also just wanted to point out a detail. We have still left openings in the walls so that when there's an event that's larger than 100 year, we haven't taken away that capacity. It can still, if it's a 200 year, we can still take that extra foot of water into the garage. So we have kept the design features of the building such that in a larger magnitude storm event, we can let that water come in and go back out. It's just MDQ would like to have buildings out of floodplains.
Is your MDQ approval predicated on getting the building out of the floodplain?
It is creatively worded to accommodate either scenario that we end up with. So it's the permit, if you read through the permit, it's on you track it, I believe. It definitely talks about the different flood elevations, and if we get the approval for the conditional letter of map revision that we've asked for or not. So it sort of addressed all the different scenarios that could possibly come up here.
For a point of clarification, did you contact the DEQ prior to or during the site plan approval process, or following site plan approval and when you moved to the construction phase? At what point did you apply or contact the DEQ?
Both, but not to the level of detail where we actually had submitted plans to them and an application to them and the permit application, and they hadn't gone through and actually reviewed the plans. We had met with them, we had sat down, we talked about it, concept of what we were doing, those things, but they hadn't, at the time we got site plan approval, they had not formally reviewed the application.
I have one more question that's a follow-up to my previous one.
Okay, Commissioner Mills and then Commissioner Woods.
And this is actually more for staff. Maybe you know, Alexis, and maybe you don't. I know there was discussion about, the building, living quarters not being in the floodplain early on. And so that was an important distinction made, and we don't allow building quarters, or presumably, code doesn't allow that. If this, is this the first time that we have heard about this, that parking garages ought not be in the floodplain? Or is it do you have any sense of how that works, or what the story is there?
Yeah. I do know that residential uses are prohibited in the floodway, and that residential uses are permitted in the floodplain when elevated 1 foot above the flood elevation. I would have to defer to the floodplain coordinator about just getting buildings out. My presumption is that while you can design a building to flood, it's probably better just to avoid that flooding in the first place. Probably when you're on the very edge of a floodplain, when it's fairly shallow edge, it's probably better to keep that water, for the integrity of the building, it's probably better to keep it out of the floodplain entirely rather than permit the flooding, but that's only my presumption. I'd have to follow up. I don't know if Kathy's familiar, but I can certainly follow up with the floodplain coordinator about where this philosophy is coming from the DEQ.
And you're maybe familiar, we do have some examples of other garages that do flood. Liberty Lost, for example, the base of that building is designed to accommodate flooding. And one of the buildings in the proposed Broadway that's still under consideration, not an approved project, but is also utilizing a portion of parking for flood storage.
So following on to that, are we anticipating that we're going to have problems from this other project that's in proposal from DEQ?
I don't think so. I think, and maybe the petitioner can speak to this, I think in this case, as indicated, the permit that they are seeking provides some flexibility for either scenario from their lens. I suspect this is less about cars flooding and more about avoiding flood insurance for all the residents of this building going forward. That's as we heard from the public comment, it's a very significant cost, and that has a ripple effect on affordability and the cost of maintaining those units going forward. I think as indicated, there's going to be cars in the parking lot that will flood, whether they're in the garage. It's probably irrelevant. I suspect the significant driver for this is probably realizing the cost of flood insurance and what a barrier that's going to be for those units.
Yeah, and if indeed that's the challenge, in my mind, like that ought to have been known going into the site plan approval. So I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Woods.
So first of all, I want to make sure that I understand that the decision which is made here by Planning Commission is going to be final. This does not go to City Council.
That's
I
correct.
think someone said earlier something about council, and so it's here. The other thing, I guess, as I look at this whole site and the issue before us is we're going to have a 90% less storage capacity. But if this was coming to us from the very beginning with this sort of calculation, it would have meant that we were going to get about 10% storage capacity. So the bottom line for me is everything being taken into consideration, it's still an approval. It's still a much better situation for that site and for the residents than what we had a few years ago. And also, I'm not opposed to helping residents save on flood insurance. I mean, the recent events across the country show me that is really real, and many people certainly, you watch TV, you see people talking about the fact about flood insurance, and so it does impact the affordability and that sort of thing. So I am inclined to approve this, even though our expectations were that we were going to get a lot more. We're still doing better than if nothing had happened and if the site was not being approved. So I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods. Commissioner Weatherby, and then Commissioner Milstein.
So I think I'm agreeing more with Commissioner Mills in this area. I have a problem with moving something out of a floodplain by adding fill. That seems kind of counter to what we really want for an overall health of the floodway and the floodplain. And it does, I know insurance rates for floods have gone up a lot. And I think the reason is they don't really want people to put residences in floodplains. It's supposed to be a barrier to building. I don't think these were designed to be affordable. I don't know what the actual rates on these units are, but my guess is affordability was not necessarily the designing factor. And it feels like something that should have been known and should have been addressed, and it's a year later. And I do think, probably unfortunately for you, we all have a lot of images in our head right now of flooding, and I think it's hard for me to put my name on this and to say, yes, I agree that we should fill this area and get your building out of the flood. It just feels like the wrong thing to do for the health of the entire system. I realize that it's done. I realize that it's allowable, but it just seems like something that maybe a more creative use of way to design the building. I know you're well into it at this point. That there might be other ways around without kind of adding fill to move something out of a floodway or floodplain is, it just seems counter to what we really want to do with this. And I agree that you are probably adding a little bit of help to the area, but I don't know that we would have approved this initially. And I think even approving residences in this area is probably a little, maybe not something we should be doing. And so reducing the positive effects, just for me, I don't know that I can vote for this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Milstein.
Thank you. And this is someone speaking who lives in a building that's similar to this and also pays for flood insurance, which I'd rather not pay, but it's the cost of living in various places, especially around the downtown area. The one thing that I remember very well, because we don't often see this from when this was approved by our body, was that we had neighbors, lots of neighbors, and they were all here in support of this. Usually we see neighbors, and they're just here to oppose, but this was one of the few sites where I saw a lot of people standing up and saying this is a great thing for us. And partly it was because of what was planned to be there with regards to the neighbors who've experienced the flooding in that area. And so I can't support this just because I don't see those neighbors here today supporting this. They're not here. And so because of that, I just don't see, a site plan has been approved, and I think it's a very attractive site plan. And I would rather see the developer move forward with that site plan versus what's before us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you. You all make good points. There are a few outstanding items that I've been tracking and that I know staff has been tracking as well. If we were to postpone this, is there room in the design that both satisfies the goals you're trying to accomplish, but also reduces the impact to capacity? Is that something worth exploring to you? I guess I'll leave that as an open question to the petitioning team.
So the only, because the site is so encumbered with the drain and with the easement that goes through it, you know, it takes up all this area of the site. I can't put any stormwater management within that easement. This area is already completely full with the underground detention system. The only area I have is this tiny little triangle right over here in the corner, and I can't get any capacity out of that. It's a small little area, you know, I could pond 6 inches there, make another rain garden, but the capacity you're gonna get is gonna be, you know, 10, 15 cubic feet. It's not gonna be anything to gain you a lot of capacity. And, you know, I do wanna say, we're not filling everywhere on the site. We're actually taking a very significant cut out of the site for the building on this end. And I think in the staff report, there was a mention of a 2-foot fill. I don't know where that came from. There's no place on the site where we're filling 2 feet. We're actually cutting almost 2 feet at this end and only filling a few inches at this end. So the change in this plan from the original site plan is we're just not cutting as much out as we were cutting out before at the south end of the building.
But you're not disputing the reduction in storage capacity?
I'm not disputing the reduction in storage capacity, but we're still above and beyond what the city code requires for impacts to the floodplain. We are still providing an increase in storage capacity to the floodplain.
And as she explained, it doesn't impact the neighbors here because their yards are the lowest, and their yards are gonna fill before any of the water comes onto our site. So we're not really affecting the neighbors because their yards are already flooded by the time the water gets onto our site.
Yeah.
The water just might be 613 cubic gallons higher on their site, spread over a broad area.
Maybe a quarter of an inch over that area. I mean, we're not talking about.
No, their elevation won't change at all because they're already flooded to the flood elevations. The only thing that's going to change is that this is going to be out of the floodplain now.
Commissioner Ackerman didn't mean to step into your line of questioning there.
Thank you for now.
Okay.
Commissioner Briggs?
Since I wasn't here around the table the last time this came, I feel like I'm trying to catch up quickly. I share all of the concerns that others have about the changes to this project. However, I'm left with feeling that our concerns lie more with our code and what we allow than this project itself. They are meeting our ordinance and improving the area, though not as much as we like. And so I tend to think that we yell a little bit too much at the petitioners when we should be aggressively changing our own code if we don't like to see stuff like this. So unless somebody can convince me that this wouldn't, there's a reason this wouldn't have been approved beforehand, in which case I'd be happy to hear that argument, then I will vote in favor, sadly.
All right, thank you. And just to respond to that, I think the sense that I'm getting from several commissioners and shared to some degree is a sense of, you know, being shown something and then having it taken away. This being a benefit, and now the benefit is reduced, and I'm not sure that the petitioner and maybe the gain is significant enough that they would do this as a bait and switch. I have a feeling it is, as they say, that as they developed the design, they discovered a more beneficial way to, from their perspective of the project or the future owners. But I share the same reluctance, I think, as others to approve, because it's, you know, we had something for the community that was offering potentially what looked like better benefit than is currently being proposed. And what I would have hoped is that you would come back to us and say, well, we can't provide you that, we're going to lose this, but we can do this to try to make up for that. So it's a little disappointing that there was nothing, that no other storage options looked at. You know, you're raising the grade a little bit, you're doing a lot of fill. Is there no opportunity to put some structured fill under there that can have voids in it for storage that can make up for a little bit of that lost storage?
If I could, I would, but as we go back to where we started, it's a brownfield, it's contaminated. So any place where I have storage, I have to line it so that that stored water doesn't commingle with groundwater. So if I design something below grade that can hold water and flood, I would have to completely line it. And you wouldn't get the groundwater wouldn't come in. Yeah, so it would never, you know, see water unless it was an extreme flood event, probably.
So it wouldn't infiltrate, but you can store and release.
I can't like let the groundwater like seep into it or soak into it, or. And we've already put that gravel, that underground detention system is going to have a huge PVC liner. There's big pipes in it, and then gravel packed all around that to provide exactly what you were talking about. And I've used as much of that area along the west side of the site as I can possibly.
You explore it under the building footprint?
I can't go that low because we do have a groundwater situation, and I have to be able to outlet the water somewhere. And the outlet that I would have to go to, if I went underneath the building and stored water way underneath the building, I wouldn't be able to get it to outlet anywhere to drain to, like the storm sewer out in Felch or out in, you know, along the drain, because those elevations aren't low enough to accommodate going below the building even further. If that makes sense.
I think I understand the gravity part of it, yes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
All right. All right, appreciate the response.
Okay.
Just to finish up my comments, and then Commissioner Gibrandl, I am reluctant to approve this, but I do note that the staff has recommended approval, and it does meet our code. So I'm probably of a mind that I will begrudgingly vote for it for those reasons, and that there are improvements to the neighborhood that the site is making, or the project is making into the site. But I don't like the idea of petitioners coming back after the fact and looking for these kind of modifications. Not only does it take up time of the commission, but it also, you know, this is not a time, as was noted, that the neighbors are present and probably not on their radar screen as much after the project has been approved. Like I said, grudgingly, probably. Commissioner Gibrandl?
I feel like the neighbors were mostly excited about the fact that it was getting cleaned up and that it was going to look a lot nicer. And I don't think they had any illusions about the flooding changing in their own properties. I think that was really mostly why they were here, because it was a pretty crappy collection of, you know, stuff there. I feel like for us, in terms of it being a planned project, that it was one of the things that we used checking off the boxes of why we approved it as a planned project. And so that's the bait and switch part that feels bad, is that it's like, well, that was one of the 4 things or whatever it was, you know, the brownfield and the cleaning up and, you know, I mean, all these other things too. And so to take one of those things away in a, you know, 90%, that's most of that box that's not checked anymore, you know. So I think that's the tough thing. It feels like it's, you know, the momentum is going, oh, can we just do this thing? But that was really an important piece of it too. So I also feel hampered by the code too. I agree with, I feel similarly. as our chair, so I think I will grudgingly vote for it. But I think the public piece for me is really, I feel like the neighbors wanted to see it because it got cleaned up, not because they felt like it was suddenly going to change their flood patterns. So I don't, even if they had been aware of it tonight, I don't know that they would necessarily show up and say, I can't believe this is happening. I think they just really wanted it to get cleaned up and look better. That's where I am with it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ackerman, or do you have more comment, or?
No.
Oh,
Trudeau.
so yeah, I'll
Sorry.
take my turn. A lot of what I wanted to say has been said already. I share Commissioner Briggs' position of not having been on this body when this was approved, and so it's hard for me to weigh like how big of a step back from the benefits this feels like, and it's hard for me to tell whether, if this was how it came to us initially, whether I would approve it or not. It's tough. I also feel a little bit constrained in not fully understanding like the total impact on the floodplain that this site like impacts and what its fair share should be in terms of mitigation. And like, you know, over the course of the site, a couple of inches turns into a lot of cubic yards, but then over the whole floodplain, how much does that really matter? And is this still a big enough improvement? So I'm a little bit like torn, just not having a good sense there. I'm not as swayed by the affordability argument for this specific site. I think in general, looking at how our processes and approval processes work and trying to align all these different agencies that like has an affordability impact, that I think that's a different problem than this particular project. And I think ultimately this more will affect profitability than affordability. Because it'll be easier to sell these things if people don't have to pay that insurance. And the last thing I'm struggling with is like whether or not people should have to buy insurance if they're here, whether or not it gets raised up and out. We don't really know what the future holds in terms of flooding. And by not having it, are they actually going to be at greater risk in the long term than sort of being forced to protect that? But maybe that's not our decision to make. So I'm still not quite sure which way I want to go here, but I'll have to make up my mind real soon.
Very soon. Mr. Ackerman, did you have a additional question?
A final thought. I apologize for speaking 3 times, but it's not an easy one. And while I didn't vote on this at this table, I did just after you all, and your recommendation, the way it held, meant something, especially with regards to its impact on our stormwater systems. This is an incredibly challenging site. As was noted, it's narrow, it's contaminated, and it runs along the creek drain, none of which lend themselves to an easy development or in a development that can immediately check off every box. I think with that, we also had a current property owner who was willing to take on that challenge and is attempting to do so in terms of cleanup, in terms of improving the stormwater as it exists now or as it existed a year ago before demolition. I think it's important to remember that, you know, this is an improvement to the area. I don't think that as this area becomes increasingly residential, an industrial site doesn't seem proper. A contaminated industrial site seems even less proper. And a contaminated site that gets hit by a lot of stormwater seems even further from proper. So while I'm equally dismayed at what feels like a lessening of the community benefit from this, I think it's important to note what they are adding. Clean up, improve stormwater systems that go beyond code. And I think it's also important to realize that these are bigger systemic issues, from what does our code allow to what does flood insurance allow, which is out of our control, but also the built infrastructure. And the floodplain extends away from this property, and there are opportunities for infrastructure improvements, like busting a tunnel through the rail line to improve drainage. I don't think that the burden should lay squarely on, private property holders who do pay, their stormwater rates for that added public benefit. So I am reluctantly supporting it, given the complexity of the project, the fact that I don't foresee something else taking its place, given that it's, being redeveloped by the property owner, who's held it for years. And I guess I'll spare you my voice. You've heard enough of it tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. And you can share more with council. Well, I guess this one won't go to council.
No.
So I think we are, oh, I thought we were. Commissioner Mills and then Commissioner Woods.
Because I ended my comments saying I'm super torn, I thought I should at least put on record why I plan to vote against this. And that is because I do not think that it meets the criterion that the development limits the disturbance of natural features to the minimum necessary to allow a reasonable use of the land. I think that it appears that their DEQ permit is written so that even if this doesn't pass, they could still go forward. And yes, it would make those units more expensive, but I was actually swayed by Commissioner Weatherby's assessment that this was not intended to be affordable housing from the outset, and that this is something that could have been knowable, but the information that this is not hindering that permit is leads me to believe that even without this site plan, and the changes to the floodplain, they would still have a reasonable use of the land. That's why I will be voting against it.
And my understanding is that's correct. All we're voting on is whether to allow the fill and does not change the approved status of their existing project.
Exactly.
Commissioner Woods.
Trying to remember what I was going to say now, but so one of the things that someone mentioned was public benefit, and I'm still convinced that for the most part, we're going to get more public benefit by this project moving forward. And I haven't heard anything from the petitioner which would indicate that they would not move forward either with this or with the previous iteration of this. So I think that is comforting to know. Also, to the petitioner, can you tell me how this particular property falls into Ann Arbor's proposed tree line urban path or whatever? Urban trail.
Kathy can confirm this, but there's an easement that runs across the west side of our property that permits public travel along the old railroad spur. So that is viewed as a link in that trail.
Mm-hmm. And so you do plan on permitting people to use that sort of thing?
It's part of our development agreement.
Okay, great.
Can I clarify that, please?
Sure.
Yeah, so there are actually two public easements on this site. The first one is the one that was just being mentioned, which is the entire length of this side of the site, and that's specifically intended to be a link, at least temporarily, unless the master plan for the Allen Creek drain, system changes, but potentially permanent, and there is an easement for that. There's a second easement for what I would call more routine pedestrian use of this pathway through the site as if this were a public street, which technically it's not. But basically, a secondary easement that follows this sidewalk line throughout the entire site as a connector from people coming up the street that can cross the site, just as again, as if they were walking the sidewalk on Ashley or First or anywhere else.
Didn't you also agree to allow part of that building to be?
Oh, yes, well, and then, I don't know if we need to get into all of the conditions, but ultimately, another one of the conditions related to the conditional rezoning is that 50% of this building has been offered to the city park system and/or the Greenway Conservancy at $1 a month rent, basically, in perpetuity as a Greenway office or
Interpretive
entry
center.
center or interpretive center. That's another item that's associated with the project.
Thank you. Without knowing the specifics of that sort of thing, I am just going to reiterate that I'm in favor of this. I think it's not unusual for things to change in terms of what the DEQ is suggesting, and it's positive that DEQ is doing something positive at this point, because in our own experience here in Ann Arbor, that doesn't always happen. So I'm not at all feeling like somehow or other the petitioner has negated to do what they needed to do because of the suggestions that are now coming from the DEQ. But I also, while I understand that bait and switch is something that we might sometimes use, I don't think that I'm convinced that that is happening in this case. And in fact, the fact that the petitioner is even going to permit part of the tree line, whatever it's called, project to go through there is indeed, I think, admirable. So again, I'm going to support this.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods. So I do think we're probably approaching a vote, so get yourselves ready in terms of how you're going to vote. It's my understanding that that we need to have 6 affirmative votes for this to pass. I'm going to read the motion once more, just in case we've forgotten. This is the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves the Kingsley Condominiums revised natural features protection plan to amend the impacts to the 100-year floodplain. All commissioners in favor, please raise your right hand and say yes. Yes.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, it looks like 6 exactly. Did you get names?
Keep them up.
Okay. Ackerman, Briggs, Klein, Trudeau, Woods, and Guberandel in the affirmative. All opposed?
No,
Mills, Milstein, and Weatherby.
Yeah, Weatherby.
Motion passes.
So the motion does pass, 63.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next item up is audience participation. This is another chance for members of the audience to address the commission for up to 3 minutes on any item at all, even the one we just voted on, if you hadn't have enough of that one yet. So if you'd like to address the commission, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Going once, going twice? Okay. I'm going to close the audience participation aspect, and we're going to go on to commission number 12, commission proposed business. Is there any commission proposed business for this evening? Commissioner Mills.
I'd like to suggest, in light of the last discussion, we've had the floodplain ordinance on our agenda for a while, and I don't think that this is going to be the last building that's proposed in the floodplain, and issues about flood insurance ought to have been known early on, and I feel like this could happen again if it's not clear in our ordinance that something to the effect of, like, I think we need to have a better stand about whether we're allowing buildings in the floodplain or not. And so I don't recommend that we move it. I know that our work plan is very full. We have actually been ticking things off, which is fantastic. But perhaps at a future work session, we could see where it might fit in the priorities, and if maybe we need to reprioritize things, if anyone else. I thought that was pretty soft in terms of what I am proposing.
Still waiting. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other commission proposed business? No doubt, Commissioner Mills, that the flooding is not going to get any less in the coming years. So it's something certainly that deserves attention. There's no other business. I'm going to look for a motion for adjournment just before everyone scatters. And we are going to take, time is it? Is it almost 9:30? You all want to take a 10-minute break and then come back here for our working session because we can never get enough planning commission, right?
Is it here? Working session will be here?
We will be here, yes. Is there a motion, Commissioner Milstein? Seconded by Commissioner Trudeau. All in favor to adjourn?
Yes.
Yes, that we are adjourned. Thank you.